Her knees hit the tile before she even registered falling. A stranger's phone was already up, already recording before Emily Carter could catch her breath. Guess that's what happens when you take up that much space. A woman's voice sneered from the crowd. Then a hand, not a phone. A hand reaching down through the wreckage of shattered jewelry. "She deserves better than this," a stranger said loud enough for the whole mall to hear. Silence. 40 people froze at once. That one sentence didn't just pull Emily off the floor. It set off a chain of events that would change 2 broken families forever. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why millions of people couldn't stop watching. If you're watching tonight from anywhere across America, Ohio, Texas, Georgia, Arizona, wherever you're sitting right now, drop your city in the comments so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if stories like this one speak to you, hit subscribe before we begin, because what happens to Emily and Daniel over the next 2 hours is going to stay with you. Let's go. The security guard's radio crackled before Emily even understood what had happened to her. "Got a woman down near the east entrance, might need an escort out." A situation. That's what she'd become, not a person. A problem to be managed. Glass crunched under her palms. Earrings scattered across the tile in a bright, ugly spray. 40 phones were already raised before she'd caught her breath from the fall. And the first voice to reach her wasn't concern. It was a woman somewhere behind her, not even bothering to lower her tone. "Guess that's what happens when you take up that much space." Laughter came fast. Easy. The kind that cost nothing because nobody in that crowd had to think twice about who they were laughing at. Emily didn't look up. She'd learned that lesson years ago. Looking up just gave people a better angle for the video. "I'm sorry," she said to no one, to everyone. "I'll pay for it. I didn't mean to." "Ma'am?" The store manager crouched beside her lanyard, swinging cologne thick in the air. His voice had the smooth, rehearsed calm of someone who'd delivered this exact line before. "Let's not make this a bigger scene, all right? I've got staff who can clean up. Maybe it's best if you head out for today." Head out for today. Like she was the mess. Like she was the thing that needed sweeping up, not the woman on her knees while strangers turned her worst moment into content. She opened her mouth to apologize again, old reflex 31 years deep, when a man's voice cut clean through the noise. "Get your hands off her bag." She looked up. He was already crouched on the other side of the wreckage, gathering broken jewelry with the calm efficiency of a man who didn't need an audience to do the right thing. Broad shoulders under a faded gray Henley. Forearms built from fixing things himself, not paying someone else to. Behind him, 2 little girls stood frozen, one maybe 8, gripping the hand of one, maybe 5, watching their father like they weren't sure what he was about to do, only that they trusted him completely. "Sir, this really isn't," the manager started. A rack fell over. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That happens in stores every day. You don't need a grown woman crying on the floor to fix that. You need a broom. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone lowered. He stacked the last of the earrings on the counter, stood to his full height, and reached down toward Emily, palm open, patient, like he had nowhere else on earth to be. Emily stared at that hand. She hadn't taken a stranger's hand in years. Kindness in her experience came with strings, pity wearing a friendly face. She braced for the shift, the moment this would turn into something else. It never came. "I've got you," he said. "Take your time." She took his hand. Calloused. Warm. Certain. He pulled her to her feet like she weighed nothing, not because she didn't, but because he simply didn't care that she did. "Thank you," she whispered. It was all she had. He didn't answer her directly. He turned instead, slow and deliberate, toward the crowd still hovering with their phones half raised. "She deserves better than this." Flat. Certain. Not a performance, a statement of fact. "All of you. Better than laughing at a woman on the ground. Better than filming her like she's entertainment. She had an accident. That's the whole story." Nobody answered him. The teenager who'd laughed first found something urgent to study near his own sneakers. The woman who'd made the crack about taking up space turned and speed-walked toward the food court, her face flushing a red. Emily allowed herself exactly 1 second of quiet satisfaction over. The manager muttered something about a broom and disappeared into the back like the floor had opened up beneath him. The mall exhaled and kept moving. A toddler cried near the carousel. Pop music kept playing overhead indifferent, like nothing at all had happened. But something had happened. Emily could feel it sitting in her chest. Warm, strange, unfamiliar, pushing up through shame that wouldn't fully leave for days. A stranger had stood between her and a crowd of strangers. A stranger had said out loud that she mattered. It had been years since anyone had bothered. "I'm Daniel," the man said once the crowd thinned. He glanced back and waved his daughters closer. "This is Sophie." The older girl approached carefully, still holding her sister's hand. "And this one's Lily. Fair warning, she's got no filter." Lily, 5, and entirely unbothered by tact, tilted her head. "Were you crying? You look like you were crying." "Lily!" Sophie was mortified. Emily laughed, small, surprised, real, the first genuine one in longer than she could name. "I was a little sad," she admitted, crouching despite her aching knees. "I feel better now. Because Daddy yelled at the mean people." "I didn't yell," Daniel said. "You kind of yelled," Sophie muttered, and the corner of her mouth twitched just barely. Emily stood wiping her eyes fast. "I'm Emily Carter. Thank you, you didn't have to do any of that." "Somebody should have done it before I got here," Daniel said. Plain, no performance in it. Something older underneath the words that Emily couldn't name yet. "You good to get to your car? I can walk you." "I'm fine." Too fast. Old habit minimize shrink take up as little room as possible. She turned to go. Got 3 steps. "Wait." She turned back. He was crouched again, picking something small off the tile, a cheap silver pendant, a little heart on a thin chain bent slightly from the fall. "This one's yours, rolled out of your bag." "That's not mine, that's from the display. Already paid for it." Something shifted in his voice, less certain than the man who'd just faced down a crowd. "Figured you should walk out of here with something, not just—" He gestured at the wreckage, the stairs, the whole ugly afternoon without needing to name any of it. Emily looked at the little heart in his open palm. $12, maybe less. But the plainness of it, no strings, no expectation, cracked something open in her chest she'd kept sealed for years. "You didn't have to." "I know," Daniel said. "I wanted to." She took it. Their fingers brushed. She told herself it meant nothing. She thought about it the whole drive home. She thought about it that night too, the little heart sitting on her nightstand, and she couldn't say why she hadn't just tossed it in a drawer with everything else she never let herself keep. She thought about it the next morning, opening her phone out of habit, finding the video already posted. 30,000 views before breakfast. Most comments were exactly what she expected. Cruel, careless, the kind of ugliness people type, without remembering. There's a person on the other end. But a few weren't. A few were about Daniel. Who is this guy? This is what a real man looks like. Somebody find him a medal. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily wasn't the main character of her own humiliation. Someone else's decency had rewritten the story before the cruelty could finish telling it. She had no idea, coffee going cold in her hands, that this wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning. 2 days later, Emily stood in the produce aisle of the grocery store 3 blocks from her apartment, debating, as she did most nights, whether she had the energy to cook or would cave and order takeout again. A small voice shrieked across the aisle. "It's her, Daddy! It's her! It's her! It's her!" Lily was already barreling toward her. Behind her, pushing a cart, with the specific exhaustion of a single father doing the weekly shop alone, came Daniel, and behind him, Sophie, headphones around her neck, working hard at looking unimpressed and failing. Emily. Daniel's face shifted, surprise first, then something softer. Small world. "Small town, one grocery store," Emily said, glad her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You look good," Daniel said, then winced at himself. "I mean better than the mall. Not that you looked bad, I know what you meant." Emily smiled easy and unguarded, surprising even herself. "Daddy said we might see you again," Lily announced, entirely unprompted. "He said the mall's not that big and neither is this town." "Lily." Daniel's ears went red. "She's not wrong," Emily said, biting back a grin. "We're headed to get pizza," Daniel said, careful and casual at once, a man testing a bridge before trusting it with his weight. "If you're free, no pressure, figured I'd ask." Sophie's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Lily was already tugging Emily's sleeve. "Please come. Daddy always gets boring pepperoni, every single time." "Pepperoni's a classic," Daniel said, mock-wounded, and Emily laughed loud enough to surprise herself. She knew where invitations like this usually led. The careful dinner where someone's eyes tracked her plate, silently counting bites. The conversation that curved eventually toward her, weight her health, some concern dressed up as kindness. She'd learned the hard way that even generosity sometimes came with fine print. But there was something about Daniel. The plainness of him at the mall, the $12 necklace handed over like nothing, the way his daughters looked at her now, like she was simply someone their father liked, that made her want to risk it just this once. "Okay," she said. "Pizza sounds good." Lily let out a triumphant shout and grabbed her hand like the matter had already been decided. Daniel caught Emily's eyes over his daughter's head. Something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe, or relief, or something neither of them had a name for yet. "Thank you," he said quietly, just for her, while the girls argued toppings ahead of them. "For coming." "Thank you for asking," Emily said, and meant it more than she let show. The pizza place was small. 2 bright, red vinyl booths, a jukebox nobody used anymore. Lily claimed the seat beside Emily before anyone else could, announcing she was basically part of the group now. Sophie sat across, quieter, watching. "So," Daniel said once the waitress had taken their order, pepperoni half plain for Sophie extra cheese. Lily had negotiated like a tiny union rep. "What do you do, Emily Carter?" "Dental office, front desk, scheduling insurance." Not exactly thrilling. Somebody's got to keep the world's teeth on schedule. "Somebody's got to," she agreed, smiling. "What about you?" "Contractor. Kitchens, additions, the occasional bathroom disaster where a husband tried to DIY it first." He said it easily, but Emily noticed how carefully he skipped over any mention of a wife and filed it away without pressing. "Daddy built our whole back porch," Lily said proudly. "By himself. Well, Mommy helped pick the paint, but she's not here anymore, so—" "Lily." Sophie's voice cracked, sharp, protective. Daniel's jaw tightened for just a second before he smoothed it over. "It's okay," he said quietly, resting a hand on Sophie's arm. "It's okay, Bug." Silence sat at the table, the kind with real weight. Emily, who'd spent years learning to read a room for the exact moment someone was about to ask something she didn't want to answer, recognized this instantly as a door. She wasn't invited through yet. "The porch sounds beautiful," she said instead, gently to Lily. "I bet you picked good colors." Lily's face lit right back up, grief and joy sitting so close together at 5 years old they could trade places in a heartbeat. "I picked the flower pots. Daddy said I have an eye for color." "You do," Daniel said, and his shoulders eased. Emily looked at him, then really looked past the shoulders and the calm mall voice, and saw what was underneath. Tired eyes. The specific exhaustion of a man holding a household together alone for far longer than anyone should have to. She recognized it because she carried her own version of the same weight. They didn't know each other's full stories yet. Emily didn't know about the nights Daniel sat in his truck in the driveway, unable to walk into a house that still felt like it was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Daniel didn't know about the years Emily spent shrinking herself smaller at every family dinner, the friendships that quietly dissolved one excuse at a time, the mirrors she'd trained herself to walk past without looking. But something had started. Neither said it out loud, neither was ready to. The pizza arrived. Lily insisted on serving everyone personally, dropping a slice onto Emily's plate with the seriousness of a 5-star waiter. "There, now you have to come back. That's the rule." "Is that the rule?" "That's the rule." Lily confirmed with total certainty. Sophie watched Emily a long moment before speaking. "You're not weird about it," she said finally. "About what?" Emily asked, though some part of her already knew. "Dad." Sophie shrugged, suddenly very focused on a piece of pepperoni. "People get weird when they find out about Mom. They either act like it never happened or act like it's the only thing that matters about us. You're doing neither." Emily set her slice down and chose her words carefully. This wasn't small talk, it was a test administered by a 12-year-old who'd learned to size up adults the hard way. "I don't know your story yet," Emily said honestly, "so I'm not going to pretend I do. When you want to tell me, I'll listen. Until then, I'm just glad to be eating pizza with you." Sophie studied her a moment longer, then gave the smallest nod, small, but real. Something had shifted. Daniel didn't say anything, but Emily caught him watching something in his face she didn't have a name for either. Not quite gratitude, not quite hope, something in between. A man remembering slowly what it felt like to let his guard down at all. They stayed longer than any of them planned. Lily fell half asleep against Emily's arm somewhere around the third slice, and nobody moved to wake her. Sophie unwound bit by bit until she was actually laughing at one of Daniel's terrible pizza-topping jokes, the kind of laugh that clearly hadn't come easy in that house for a long time. When they finally stood to leave, Daniel walked Emily to her car, Lily half asleep on his shoulder, Sophie trailing behind with her phone out, but not really looking at it. "Thanks for saying yes," Daniel said, standing a careful distance away, like a man who didn't want to presume anything. "Thanks for asking twice," Emily said. "The mall and now this. I don't usually do that. Ask people, any of it." He shifted Lily's weight, glanced back at Sophie, then back at Emily. "The girls haven't laughed like that at dinner in a long time, Sophie especially. She's had a hard couple of years. They're good kids. You're doing something right." "Some days I don't feel like it." "Nobody feels like it most days," Emily said. "Doesn't mean it isn't true." Something crossed his face, surprise maybe at hearing something he needed from someone he'd known less than a week. "Can I get your number?" he asked, and for the first time all night sounded almost nervous. "Not just, I mean for the girls. Lily will ask about you every day if I don't. But also," he stopped, started again, "also for me, if that's okay." Emily looked at this man who had stood between her and a crowd without a second thought, who had bought a $12 necklace so she wouldn't walk out empty-handed, who had just told his exhausted, grieving daughters it was okay to laugh again, and felt something in her chest she hadn't let herself feel in years. "It's okay," she said, and gave him her number. He typed it in carefully, like it mattered, like she mattered. When he looked back up, his eyes were steady and warm enough that she forgot for one whole moment about the mall, about the video, about the 30,000 strangers who'd laughed at her 2 days ago. "Good night, Emily Carter." "Good night, Daniel." She drove home with the windows cracked, cold air moving through the car. She didn't cry this time, not from sadness. She just drove and breathed and let herself feel for one quiet ride home that maybe something good had finally found her. She had no way of knowing what was coming, no way of knowing. The mall video, quiet for 2 days, mostly forgotten, was about to resurface on a much larger platform, reposted by an account with millions of followers, captioned with a cruelty engineered to spread. No way of knowing that within a week strangers who'd never met her would be picking her body apart in comment sections by the thousands. No way of knowing she'd wake one morning to find her actual name dug up by someone with too much time and too little conscience, trending in ways that would make her physically sick. No way of knowing that the same kindness cracking her open tonight would soon become the only thing standing between her and disappearing completely. But that night, driving home under a sky full of stars, she barely noticed. Emily Carter let herself feel something she'd nearly forgotten the shape of. Hope. And across town, in a quiet house with 2 sleeping daughters and a porch he'd built with his own hands, Daniel Brooks sat on the front steps, phone in his palm, staring at a new contact, saved under one word, Emily, and felt for the first time in 3 years. Like maybe he wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe he was starting to live again too. 3 weeks passed, and Emily's phone buzzed every morning before her alarm even went off. It was never anything big. A photo of Lily's crooked drawing of a cat that looked more like a potato with legs. A text from Daniel asking if she liked her coffee black or with cream, because Sophie was making a chart apparently cataloging everything Emily liked, so she'd stop having to guess. A voice memo from Lily singing half a birthday song 3 weeks early because she couldn't wait to test it out. Emily found herself smiling at her phone in the break room at work, and her coworker Priya noticed. "Who is that?" Priya said, not really a question. "Nobody," Emily said, and then immediately laughed at herself because her face was clearly saying otherwise. "That's not a nobody face. It's a guy. From the mall. The one from the video." Priya's eyebrows shot up. "The guy who told everyone off Emily." "Emily, that's not nobody, that's a whole plot." Emily didn't correct her. She wasn't sure she could have even if she wanted to. Somewhere in 3 weeks of pizza nights and grocery store run-ins and long phone calls after the girls went to bed, something had shifted from the man who helped her into Daniel, plain and simple, the way a name becomes a person instead of an event. He called her on a Thursday night, and she could hear the particular quiet of his house behind him, the kind that only exists after children are finally asleep. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, and there was something careful in his voice that made Emily sit up straighter on her couch. "Sure. Sophie asked me today if you were my girlfriend." Emily's stomach did something complicated. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know. Because I don't. I mean, I know what I want the answer to be. I just didn't know if you—" He stopped, started again slower. "I haven't done this in 3 years, Emily. I don't really know how anymore." "Neither have I," Emily admitted, and the honesty of it surprised her, coming out easier than she expected. "Not because of losing anyone, just because I stopped believing anyone would want to." "I want to," Daniel said, simple and direct, no hedging in it at all. "If that's not moving too fast, if that's something you'd want to." Emily closed her eyes. Somewhere in her chest, a wall she'd built brick by brick, over a decade, cracked, not shattered, just cracked, letting a little light through for the first time in longer than she could count. "I'd want that," she said. Yeah. She could hear the smile in his silence before he even said anything else. "Sophie's gonna be insufferable," Daniel said. "She's gonna want a whole family meeting. She takes this stuff very seriously. I can handle a family meeting. Lily's gonna want you at her dance recital next month. Fair warning, she's already planning where you'll sit." Emily laughed, and it came out wet tears she didn't fully understand, pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I'll be there." That was the night everything changed. Not with fireworks, not with some grand declaration, just two tired adults on the phone admitting they wanted something neither of them had let themselves want in years. And for 2 weeks after that, life took on a shape Emily had genuinely forgotten was possible. Sunday dinners at Daniel's house. Lily perched on the counter, narrating every step of the cooking process with total authority she had no right to at 5 years old. Sophie slowly, carefully letting Emily further into the parts of her life that mattered, showing her a sketchbook one evening, without being asked, quiet and shy about it, watching Emily's face for any sign of judgment, and finding none. "These are incredible, Sophie," Emily said, turning the pages, slowly, genuinely stunned by the detail in a 12-year-old's careful pencil work. "Have you shown your art teacher these?" "She says I have talent." Sophie said the words coming out flat, defensive, like she expected to be told that talent didn't matter, that she should focus on something more practical. "She's right," Emily said. "You should keep going. Whatever it costs you to keep doing this, it's worth it." Sophie looked up at her, something unguarded in her face for just a second. "You really think so?" "I really do." Daniel, watching from the kitchen doorway, said nothing, but Emily caught the look on his face later that night after the girls were in bed when he pulled her into a hug on the porch he'd built with his own hands. "Thank you," he said, quiet into her hair. "For what?" "For seeing her, really seeing her. She's needed that." "She's easy to see," Emily said. "She's remarkable." "So are you," Daniel said. And something in his voice made Emily's breath catch, made the whole porch and the whole quiet street and the whole ordinary Tuesday night feel suddenly impossibly significant. He kissed her, then gentle, unhurried, the kind of kiss that asked a question and waited patiently for the answer instead of assuming it. Emily kissed him back, and for the first time in years, she didn't think about how she looked. Doing it, didn't calculate angles or worry about being seen wrong. She just let herself be there present, wanted real. It should have stayed that simple. It didn't. The first sign came on a Monday morning 6 days after that kiss on the porch, when Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Priya that made her stomach drop before she'd even opened it fully. "Have you seen this?" A link followed. Emily clicked it without thinking, standing in her kitchen with a piece of toast half raised to her mouth, and the bottom fell out of her morning entirely. The mall video, her video. The one from 6 weeks ago. The one she'd almost forgotten existed outside of the occasional stray comment had been reposted. Not just reposted. Repackaged. A massive account with a following in the millions had taken the footage, clipped it down to just the fall. Just the laughter. Just Emily on her knees, surrounded by broken glass, and captioned it with 3 words that made Emily's whole body go cold. Someone needs help. Not sympathy. Not even genuine concern. The caption was mockery dressed as concern, the internet's favorite trick, cruelty, wearing a mask of compassion, so it could spread further faster, protected from criticism by its own false kindness. The clip had been up for 11 hours. It already had 4 million views. Emily set the toast down. Her hands weren't steady enough to hold it anymore. She scrolled, and she shouldn't have. She knew even in the moment that she shouldn't have. But some part of her needed to see exactly how bad it was, the way you can't stop touching a bruise to see if it still hurts. It still hurt. The comments were worse than anything she'd read 6 weeks ago. Someone had found her workplace not through anything she'd shared, just through the kind of internet detective work that strangers apparently had unlimited time for, and posted the dental office's name and address. Someone else had found an old photo of her from a company picnic 3 years ago and was using it as a before comparison, as if her body had somehow gotten worse in the intervening time, as if that would have mattered either way. Someone had made a meme. An actual meme, her face and her fall, turned into a joke template, being passed around by people who would never have to look her in the eyes and see what their laughter cost. Her phone rang. Daniel. She almost didn't answer. She almost let it go to voicemail because some old deep part of her wanted to disappear entirely before he could see how bad this was, before he could realize what he'd attached himself to by standing up for her in the first place. But her thumb moved before the rest of her caught up, and his voice came through immediately tight with worry. Emily, have you seen it? I'm seeing it right now, she said, and her voice cracked in a way she hated. Don't look at the comments. Emily, please don't look at the comments. Too late, she said, and something in her chest gave way entirely. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over, hot and humiliating, even in the privacy of her own kitchen. I'm coming over, Daniel said. You don't have to. I'm coming over, he said again, firmer this time, no room for argument in it. 15 minutes, don't go anywhere. He made it in 12. Emily hadn't moved from the kitchen floor where she'd eventually slid down against the cabinet's phone still clutched in her hand, like she couldn't stop scrolling, even though every scroll was a fresh wound. When Daniel let himself in, she'd given him a key 2 weeks ago. One more small step, neither of them had made a big deal about. He found her there, and he didn't say anything at first. He just sat down on the floor next to her, took the phone gently out of her hand, and set it face down on the counter above them, out of reach. Hey, he said softly. They found my job? Emily said, staring at nothing. They found my job, Daniel. What if someone shows up? What if my boss sees this? What if I lose? You're not losing your job over strangers being cruel on the internet. You don't know that. I know that if anyone at that office has a problem with you because of this, that's on them, not you. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're catastrophizing because you're scared, and that's understandable, and I'm not going anywhere while you work through it." Emily turned to look at him. Really, look at him. This man sitting on her kitchen floor in his work boots because he'd driven straight over without even changing, and something in her chest ached with how much she suddenly fiercely didn't want to lose this. "I don't want you to get dragged into this," she said. "The girls. If people start commenting if they find you, if Sophie sees—" "Let me worry about my kids," Daniel said. "You worry about you. That's the deal. That's not how relationships work." "It's how this one works today," Daniel said, and pulled her into him, and Emily let herself be held, let herself cry against his chest in a kitchen that suddenly felt less like a place she was hiding in, and more like a place where someone had chosen to find her. They stayed like that for a long time, but the video didn't stop climbing. By that evening, it had crossed 8 million views. By the next morning, it had been picked up by 2 smaller entertainment gossip accounts, each adding their own captions, each generating their own fresh wave of comments. Emily's name, her actual full name dug up by someone in the comments with nothing better to do, started appearing directly in posts, no longer anonymous, no longer just "that woman from the mall" video. Real, searchable, permanent. She stopped checking her phone. She had to. Every notification felt like a small physical blow, and after the 3rd day of feeling nauseous every time her phone buzzed, she finally deleted the apps entirely cold turkey, the way you'd pull a bandage off fast to get the pain over with quickly. It didn't help as much as she'd hoped, because 2 days after that she walked into work and found Priya waiting by the front desk. Her face doing something complicated that Emily immediately recognized as bad news, trying to look casual. "Hey," Priya said. "Can we talk for a second, in the back?" Emily's stomach dropped before Priya even finished the sentence. In the small break room door closed, Priya's usual easy warmth had folded into something careful, apologetic. "Dr. Chen wants to talk to you," she said. "About some patients called, about the video. Nobody said anything terrible. It's not like that, it's just—" She exhaled. "Some people mentioned it, recognized you from it, and a couple made comments to the front desk staff. Not to you, thank God, but Dr. Chen wants to talk to me." Emily finished numb. "I think it's just going to be a conversation. I don't think you're in trouble. I just wanted you to know before you walked in there blind." Emily nodded, throat tight, and walked into Dr. Chen's office, feeling like she was walking toward a verdict rather than a conversation. Dr. Chen was kind about it, genuinely kind, not performing kindness the way the mall manager had, but the conversation still landed like a blow. A few patients had made comments. Nothing overtly hostile, nothing that constituted harassment exactly, but enough that Dr. Chen felt he had to say something. He suggested gently that maybe Emily take a few days off. Paid, he clarified quickly, not a punishment, just space. Just time for the online noise to die down before it followed her into the office in ways he couldn't fully control. Emily understood the logic. She even, on some exhausted level, appreciated that he was trying to protect her rather than punish her. It still felt like being told to disappear. She sat in her car in the parking lot afterward and didn't cry, which surprised her more than if she had. She just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing, feeling something colder and more dangerous than sadness settling into her chest. It wasn't grief exactly. It was closer to resignation. The old familiar voice in her head, the one that had gone quiet these past 6 weeks, the one she'd almost let herself believe was gone for good, came back with a vengeance. "This is what happens," the voice said. "This is what always happens. You let yourself get comfortable. You let yourself believe someone's kindness meant something real. And then the world reminds you exactly what you are. A joke, a cautionary tale, something people point at and laugh." She drove home in a fog. She didn't call Daniel. She told herself it was because she didn't want to worry him, but some deeper, more honest part of her knew the truth. She was starting to pull away, brick by brick, rebuilding the wall she'd let him crack 6 weeks ago. Because it felt safer than waiting for the inevitable moment, he'd realized the cost of loving her wasn't worth paying. He texted that evening. "How was work?" She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Fine. Tired. Might turn in early." It wasn't a lie exactly. It just wasn't the whole truth. And Daniel Sharp, observant Daniel, who noticed things most people missed, could apparently tell the difference, even through a text message, because his response came back fast. "You don't sound fine." "What happened?" "Nothing. Just a long day." Emily. Just her name. Nothing else. And somehow that single word sitting alone on her screen undid her more than a full paragraph of concern could have. She called him instead of texting back, and the moment he answered, the whole day came pouring out Dr. Chen's office, the careful suggestion to take time off, the cold, sick feeling of being managed instead of supported, the voice in her head that had never really gone away, just gone quiet for a while. Daniel didn't interrupt her. He let her get all the way through it. Let the silence sit for a moment after she finished, and then he said something that Emily would replay in her head for weeks afterward. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said. "That day at the mall, everyone laughing, everyone filming. And you know what I remember most clearly? Not the crowd, you. On your knees, apologizing to people who didn't deserve an apology for an accident that wasn't your fault. That's what broke my heart that day. Not that people were cruel. People are cruel, that's not new information. What broke my heart was watching you apologize for existing." Emily's breath caught. "And now, here you are again." Daniel continued quieter. "Apologizing. To your boss basically for other people's cruelty. Pulling away from me because you think that protects me somehow." "Emily, I need you to hear this. I am not something you need to protect from you. I chose this. I choose it every single day since that mall. You don't get to decide unilaterally that I can't handle loving you." "It's not that simple," Emily whispered. "It is, actually. It's exactly that simple. The only complicated part is you convincing yourself it isn't." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything neither of them had said yet. "I'm scared," Emily admitted finally, the words costing her something to say out loud. "I'm scared this gets worse. I'm scared it touches your kids. I'm scared that 6 months from now you look at me and you're tired of the noise, tired of the comments, tired of being the guy attached to the internet's favorite punching bag." "That's not going to happen." "You don't know that." "No," Daniel agreed. "I don't know the future. Nobody does. But I know what I feel right now, and I know it's not going anywhere, just because some strangers on the internet are cruel. Sophie asked me last night if you're staying in our lives. You know what I told her?" "What?" "I told her yes. Because it's true. Because I meant it. So can you please, for the love of God, stop trying to talk yourself out of something good, because you're scared it's too good to be real." Emily laughed, a wet, unsteady laugh, but a real one. "You're annoyingly persuasive. I've been told." "I don't deserve you," Emily said, and immediately regretted it, because Daniel's voice sharpened instantly, something almost fierce coming into it. "Don't do that. Don't say that. You don't get to decide what you deserve based on strangers who don't know a single real thing about you. You deserve exactly what you have right now. Somebody who sees you, all of you, and isn't going anywhere." They talked for another hour that night, long after the conversation had moved past the crisis and into something softer, something that felt like healing even in the middle of a genuinely terrible week. And by the time Emily finally hung up, exhausted but steadier than she'd been all day, she believed him at least a little. At least enough to fall asleep without the old voice screaming quite as loud. She should have known the worst hadn't come yet. 4 days later, on a gray Thursday afternoon that started ordinary enough, Emily's phone rang with an unknown number, and against her better judgment, she answered it. "Is this Emily Carter?" A woman's voice, brisk, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Rachel Kim. I'm a producer with a morning talk show. We're doing a segment on online bullying, and I wanted to see if you'd be interested in—" Emily hung up before the woman finished the sentence. Her hands were shaking. She stared at the phone like it had bitten her, and before she could fully process what had just happened, it rang again. Different number. She let it go to voicemail. It rang again 10 minutes later. Different number again. By the end of the day, she'd received 7 calls from numbers she didn't recognize 2 of, which left voicemails identifying themselves as journalists. One from a podcast host wanting to give her a platform to share her story. The one that made her physically sick from someone who didn't identify themselves at all and simply breathed on the line for 4 full seconds before hanging up. The video had crossed 20 million views. It had become somehow impossibly a story bigger than itself. Not just a woman falling in a mall anymore, but a symbol, a talking point, a piece of content people fought over in comment sections, arguing about body positivity and cancel culture and everything except the actual human being at the center of it, who just wanted to disappear. Emily turned her phone off entirely that night. She sat in her dark apartment with the blinds closed, the little silver heart necklace clutched in her fist so tight the edges dug into her palm, and she let herself for the first time in weeks fully imagine what it would feel like to just vanish. Not dramatically, not tragically, just quietly. Move somewhere no one knew her name, change her number, delete every account. Become nobody again the way she'd been before a jewelry rack fell over and turned her into a headline. She didn't call Danielle that night. She told herself she'd call him tomorrow, once she'd figured out what to say, once she'd found some way to explain the thing that had been building in her chest for days. Not just fear anymore, but something heavier, something that felt disturbingly like giving up. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to her own heartbeat, and thought over and over in a loop she couldn't break. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I just wasn't here to be the story anymore. It wasn't a plan. She told herself it wasn't a plan, just a thought, just exhaustion. Talking, just the kind of dark, spiraling thinking that happens at 3 a.m. when the whole world feels like it's closing in from every direction at once. But it scared her enough that when the sun finally came up, gray and unremarkable through her closed blinds, she turned her phone back on with hands that hadn't stopped shaking all night. 43 missed calls, most from unknown numbers, 6 from Daniel, and 1 text sent at 2:47 in the morning that made her chest seize the moment she read it. Emily, I don't know what's going on, but you haven't answered in almost 24 hours, and I'm starting to really worry. Please, just tell me you're okay, please. Below it, sent an hour later, I'm coming to check on you if I don't hear back by 8 a.m. I'm sorry if that's too much. I don't care. Please just answer. It was 8:04 when she finally read it. Her phone rang again immediately, like he'd been watching, waiting, refreshing to see if she'd come back online. She answered on the first ring, and before she could even say hello, Daniel's voice came through raw and cracked in a way she'd never heard it before. Emily, thank God. Are you okay? Please tell me you're okay. I'm okay, Emily said, though her voice shook badly enough that the words didn't sound convincing even to her. You don't sound okay. I turned my phone off. I just needed... Emily, I need you to be honest with me right now. Please. Are you actually okay, or are you saying that because it's easier than telling me the truth? The question hit something raw and exposed in her chest, and Emily found herself crying, before she'd even decided to, the tears coming fast and unstoppable, all the exhaustion and fear of the past week finally breaking through the dam she'd been holding it behind. I don't know, she admitted, the words scraping out of her. I don't know if I'm okay. I had thoughts last night, bad thoughts. Not a plan. I wasn't going to do anything, but I was thinking about just disappearing, and it scared me enough that I couldn't sleep, and I didn't call you, because I didn't want you to see me like this, and I know that's exactly the kind of thing you'd want me to call you for, but I'm coming over, Daniel said, already moving. She could hear it in his voice. The sound of keys a door. Right now, I'm coming right now. Your kids are at my sister's for the morning. We planned it last week. It doesn't matter. None of that matters right now. Emily, stay on the phone with me. Don't hang up. I'm 10 minutes away. Just stay on the phone. She stayed on the phone. She listened to the sound of his truck starting the road noise, his voice steady and low, talking to her about nothing and everything. The weather, a job he had that afternoon, Lily's ridiculous new obsession with a cartoon about talking vegetables, anything to keep her present, keep her anchored, keep her from sinking back down into the dark place she'd been floating in all night. He made it in 8 minutes, not 10. When Emily opened her door, he didn't say anything at first. He just pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly, it almost hurt, and she felt something in her chest crack open completely, all the walls she'd spent the past week rebuilding coming down at once. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." "Don't apologize for that. Never apologize for that." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his eyes wet, his voice fierce and gentle at the same time. "You call me. Always. No matter what time it is, no matter how bad you think it is, you call me. Do you understand? I would rather get a call at 3 in the morning than lose one more hour not knowing if you're safe." I know that now. I got so scared, Daniel. The reporters, the calls, my job, all of it. It felt like it was never going to stop, like I was never going to get to just be a person again, instead of the story." "Okay," Daniel said, and something in his voice shifted, steadied, became decisive, in a way that pulled Emily's attention entirely. "Then we're going to make it stop. You can't control the internet." "No," he agreed. "But I can control what happens next. I've been thinking about this for days, and I didn't want to push you into anything, but I don't think we can keep just absorbing this. I think we need to get ahead of it." "What does that mean?" Daniel took a breath, and Emily could see him choosing his words carefully, the way a man does when he's about to say something he's already turned over in his mind 100 times. "I think we tell our own story," he said, "before somebody else tells it wrong. Before some talk show turns you into a segment about bullying, before the internet decides who you are without ever actually asking you. I think we sit down together and we say what actually happened in our own words, and we take that power back." Emily stared at him, something cold moving through her at the thought of it, of being seen deliberately on purpose by even more people than already had. "I don't know if I can do that." "You don't have to decide today," Daniel said gently. "You don't have to decide anything today. Today you're going to eat something, and you're going to sleep, and I'm going to sit right here on this couch and not go anywhere until you tell me you want me to. That's the only plan for today." Emily nodded, exhausted, in a way that went bone deep, and let him lead her to the couch. Let him wrap a blanket around her shoulders, like she was something precious instead of something broken. Let him sit beside her in the quiet while the morning light slowly filled the apartment. She didn't know yet that the decision Daniel had just planted, telling their own story on their own terms, would become the exact thing that changed everything. She didn't know that in less than 2 weeks she'd be sitting across from a camera she never wanted in a moment that would either destroy what remained of her privacy completely or finally hand her back the narrative that strangers had stolen from her the moment the jewelry rack hit the floor. She only knew in that quiet apartment, wrapped in a blanket with Daniel's steady hand resting against her back, that for the first time in a very dark week, she didn't feel entirely alone in the dark anymore. 3 days after that morning on the couch, Emily still hadn't given Daniel an answer about the interview. She'd gone back to work. Dr. Chen had called personally to say the offer of time off still stood no pressure, and something about his voice, careful and genuine, had almost undone her all over again. She'd gone in anyway. She needed desperately to feel like a normal person doing a normal job, even if 2 patients that week had recognized her, and one of them, an older woman getting her teeth cleaned, had reached out and squeezed her hand on the way out and said, quiet and fierce, "Don't you let them win, honey." And Emily had had to excuse herself to the supply closet for 4 minutes to cry without anyone seeing. She was learning something strange in those days, that cruelty and kindness didn't cancel each other out. They just existed side by side, both real, both true. And she had to somehow carry both without letting either one convince her it was the only thing that was real. Daniel didn't push about the interview. That was the thing that eventually tipped her towards saying yes. He never pushed. He mentioned it once more gently over dinner at his place, Lily narrating an elaborate story about her day at school that neither adult was fully listening to, and then he let it go entirely. Let the decision sit in Emily's hands without his fingerprints on it. It was Sophie of all people who changed her mind. They were in the kitchen together on a Tuesday evening, just the two of them. Daniel outside fixing something on Lily's bike, Lily supervising with the seriousness of a construction foreman. Sophie was doing homework at the counter, and Emily was making tea, and the silence between them had become comfortable in a way it hadn't been a month ago. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said, not looking up from her math worksheet. "Always." "Are you going to do the interview thing my dad mentioned?" Emily's hands stilled on the mug. "I don't know yet. Why?" Sophie set her pencil down, and when she looked up, there was something older in her face than her 12 years. Something that Emily recognized instantly as a kid who'd learned things too early, the way grief teaches lessons no child should have to know. "When my mom got sick," Sophie said carefully, like each word cost her something, "people said all kinds of things. About her. About us. Some people were really nice, brought us food, checked on us. But some people said stuff online in this cancer support group my mom was in, mean stuff like she wasn't fighting hard enough, like it was her fault somehow." Sophie's jaw tightened. She never got to say anything back. She got too sick too fast. And I used to think about that a lot, how people got to say whatever they wanted about her, and she never got a chance to tell her own story. Emily set the mug down her chest, aching in a way she hadn't expected from a conversation with a 12-year-old. "I think you should do it," Sophie said. "Not because it'll be easy. It probably won't be. But because you get a chance she didn't get. You get to be the one who tells people who you actually are instead of letting them decide it for you." Emily didn't trust her voice for a moment. When she finally spoke, it came out rough. "That's a really brave thing to say, Sophie." "I've had practice being brave," Sophie said with a small, sad shrug that broke Emily's heart clean in half. "Doesn't mean it gets easier. Just means you get better at doing it anyway." That night after the girls were asleep, Emily told Daniel she'd do the interview. He didn't celebrate. He didn't say "I told you so" or "I'm proud of you" in some performative way. He just took her hand across the porch railing and said, "Whatever you decide to say, however much or little, I've got you through all of it." "I know," Emily said, and for the first time in weeks, she actually believed it fully. No asterisk attached. The interview was scheduled for the following Saturday at a small local studio that did segments for a regional morning show, not the national program that had first called, but something smaller, gentler, run by a woman named Grace Alvarez, who had reached out personally instead of through a producer who had written Emily an actual email, instead of a form letter explaining that she'd seen the video, seen the pile-on that followed, and wanted to offer a space for Emily to say whatever she wanted to say on her own terms. No gotcha questions, no ambush editing. Emily read that email 4 times before agreeing. The morning of the interview, Emily stood in her bathroom mirror longer than she had in years. Not scrutinizing herself the way she used to, counting flaws, cataloging everything wrong, but just looking. Really looking, trying to see herself the way Daniel seemed to see her, the way Lily saw her, the way Sophie had started to see her too. She wore the navy cardigan, the same one from the mall, the one she'd worn the day everything changed. It felt important somehow to wear it again, not as some grand symbolic gesture just because it was hers, because she liked how it looked on her, because she refused to let one terrible afternoon dictate what she was allowed to wear for the rest of her life. The little silver heart necklace hung around her neck too. She hadn't taken it off in weeks. Daniel drove her to the studio. He offered to come inside, sit in the waiting room, but Emily surprised herself by saying no gently, that this was something she needed to walk into on her own 2 feet. "I'll be right here when you're done," he said, and kissed her forehead. And Emily walked into that studio feeling more like herself than she had in 6 weeks. Grace Alvarez was warm in a way that felt real rather than practiced. She sat Emily down in a comfortable chair, no harsh studio lighting, just soft and even, and started not with a question about the video, but with a simple human one. "Tell me about yourself, Emily. Not the video, you." And something about being asked that, being seen as a person before being asked to explain her worst moment, undid the last of Emily's nerves. She talked. She talked about growing up the biggest kid in every class picture, about learning early, that some rooms made her feel invisible, and others made her feel like the only thing anyone could see. She talked about the friendships that had quietly ended over the years, not through some dramatic falling out, but through a slow accumulation of small cruelties. A friend who stopped inviting her to pool parties, a family member who commented on her plate at every holiday dinner, a doctor once who spent an entire appointment about a sprained ankle talking about her weight instead. She talked about learning to apologize for existing, for taking up space, for simply being seen. And then she talked about the mall. "I remember being on the floor." Emily said, her voice steadier than she expected. "And I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment everyone's been waiting for. Because that's what it feels like when you've spent your whole life being looked at a certain way. You start to believe the world is just waiting for you to fail publicly so it can finally say what it's been thinking all along." "And then what happened?" Grace asked gently. "Then a stranger told a room full of people I deserved better," Emily said, and her voice cracked just slightly, just enough. "And it was the first time in years someone had said something like that about me out loud, where other people could hear it. That's what broke something open in me. Not that a bad thing happened. Bad things happen to everyone. It was that somebody chose in that moment to say I mattered." Grace let the silence sit for a moment before asking the question Emily had been bracing for. "There's been a lot of cruelty online since that video resurfaced. What do you want to say to the people who've mocked you, who've dug up your information, who've made this into entertainment?" Emily thought about it for a long moment. She thought about the woman in the dental office, squeezing her hand. She thought about Sophie's face in the kitchen, telling her about her mother, about wanting a chance to tell her own story. She thought about Daniel standing between her and a crowd of strangers saying 5 words that changed the entire shape of her life. "I don't have anything to say to them," Emily said finally. "Not because I'm above it, or because it doesn't hurt. It hurts every single day, more than I think people realize. But I've spent this whole conversation talking about my life, my actual life, and not 1 second of it was about them. That's the thing I've learned. Cruelty wants your attention. It wants to be the main character of your story, and I'm done giving it that." Grace's eyes were wet. "That's a powerful thing to say. It took me 31 years and one really bad day to figure it out," Emily said, and managed a small, real smile. Better late than never. They talked for another 20 minutes about Daniel, carefully, respectfully. Emily choosing her words to protect his daughter's privacy while still being honest about what he meant to her, about the small daily work of learning to be kind to herself, about what she'd say to anyone else out there who'd been laughed at, filmed, turned into a joke without their consent. "Believe the people who choose to be kind to you," Emily said near the end, looking directly into the camera for the first time. "Not the ones who are loud about their cruelty, the quiet ones, the ones who show up. Believe them. It took me a long time to learn how, and I don't want anyone else to wait as long as I did." The interview aired the following Tuesday. Emily didn't watch it live. She sat on Daniel's porch. Lily curled against her side, half asleep. Sophie sitting close on her other side, scrolling through her own phone with unusual focus, and Daniel pacing near the porch steps, checking his phone every few minutes, like a man waiting for a verdict. "It's up," he said finally, voice tight. "Don't tell me the numbers," Emily said quickly. "Please. Not tonight. I can't." "Okay," Daniel said, and put the phone away, sat down beside her instead, wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Then let's just sit here." They sat there a long time, the 4 of them, the evening settling in around them, and for a little while, Emily let herself forget entirely that millions of strangers were watching her tell the truth about her life in real time. The response when it finally reached her 2 days later, because Daniel gently insisted she needed to see at least some of it, that not all of it was going to hurt, was not what she expected. The cruel comments hadn't disappeared. They never would not entirely. Emily had learned enough by now to know that some fraction of the internet would always choose meanness over decency, that this was simply a fact of the world she'd have to keep living alongside. But they'd been buried, absolutely buried, underneath something else entirely. Women, thousands of them, then tens of thousands, had started posting their own stories, their own mall moments, their own humiliations, their own quiet decades of apologizing for existing. A hashtag had formed without anyone planning it, without any marketing team behind it. Just ordinary people recognizing themselves in Emily's words and deciding one after another to stop staying quiet too. "You deserve better" started appearing everywhere, under photos of women refusing to shrink themselves anymore, under stories of people standing up for strangers, the way Daniel had stood up for Emily, under captions that had nothing to do with Emily at all anymore, except that her 5 words borrowed from a stranger in a mall had somehow become a permission slip for thousands of people to finally believe they were allowed to take up space. Local news picked it up. Then a national outlet. Then, unbelievably, 3 weeks after the interview, aired a producer from a major daytime talk show called "Not Asking for an Ambush" segment this time, but asking with genuine humility in her voice whether Emily and Daniel might be willing to come on together to talk about what had happened, to talk about kindness in an age that seemed increasingly allergic to it. Emily said yes, only after Daniel promised firmly that they'd walk away from any part of it that felt wrong, no matter how big the platform. They didn't need to walk away. The segment aired on a Thursday afternoon, Emily and Daniel sitting side by side on a bright studio set, hands loosely linked between them. And for 11 minutes, America watched a single father and the woman he'd defended in a shopping mall talk, plainly, honestly, about grief and loneliness and the accidental ordinary heroism of choosing decency in a moment when it would have been so much easier to say nothing at all. Near the end, the host, an older woman with kind eyes and 30 years of daytime television experience, reading a room, turned to Daniel with a question that hadn't been on the pre-approved list. "Daniel, I have to ask. In that moment at the mall, what made you say something most people, if we're honest, would have just walked past?" Daniel was quiet for a second, his thumb moving absently over the back of Emily's hand. "I've got 2 daughters," he said finally. "And I think about every single day what kind of world I'm handing them, what kind of men I want them to expect to be treated by. And that day, watching a room full of grown adults laugh at a woman who'd done nothing wrong except fall down, I just thought, if I don't say something right now, what does that teach my girls about what they're supposed to accept? What does it teach them about what silence costs?" He glanced at Emily, then something soft and unguarded passing between them, the kind of look that didn't need an audience to be real. "I didn't do it to be a hero," Daniel said. "I did it because it was true. She deserved better than that. Anyone would have." The clip of that moment, just that answer 11 seconds long, was clipped and shared more than any other part of the entire segment. It reached numbers neither of them could fully comprehend, appeared on screens. In countries neither of them had ever visited, got translated into languages neither of them spoke. But none of that mattered nearly as much to either of them as what happened 3 nights later, after the noise had started to settle into something manageable, something that felt less like a storm and more like weather they'd learned to live inside. They were at Daniel's house, ordinary Tuesday spaghetti on the stove, Lily setting the table with the kind of dramatic flourish only a 5-year-old can bring to placing forks. When Sophie came downstairs holding her phone, her face unreadable in a way that made Emily's stomach tighten immediately. "Dad?" Sophie said. "Can I show you both something?" She turned the phone around. On the screen was a message sent through the school's messaging app from a classmate, a girl Sophie had mentioned once or twice before. Someone Emily gathered wasn't exactly a friend. "Saw your dad on TV LOL. Is that his girlfriend, the fat lady from the video?" Emily felt the air leave her lungs. Daniel's face went through several things, fast shock, then something colder, angrier, a version of him Emily hadn't seen before. "Sophie, I am so sorry, that is not—" "Dad?" Sophie interrupted, and her voice was steadier than either adult expected. "I already answered her." She scrolled down, showed them the reply she'd already sent, and Emily's eyes filled instantly reading the words a 12-year-old had typed, without asking anyone's permission first. "Her name is Emily. She's not the fat lady, she's an actual person, and she's the kindest adult I know besides my dad. My mom died 3 years ago, and Emily is the first person who's made our house feel less quiet again. So yeah, that's my dad's girlfriend. And honestly, you're lucky you don't know her because you'd probably like her a lot if you weren't being so mean. The kitchen was silent for a long moment. Sophie, Emily said finally, her voice thick. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. Sophie said, shrugging, though her eyes were bright too, betraying the effort the bravado was costing her. You did the interview thing even though it was scary. Figured I could send one text. Daniel crossed the kitchen and pulled his daughter into a hug so fierce Lily abandoned her fork arranging entirely just to watch wide-eyed, sensing something important was happening, even if she didn't fully understand it. I'm so proud of you, Daniel said into Sophie's hair. I'm so proud of you. It's not a big deal, Sophie mumbled into his shoulder, clearly overwhelmed, clearly moved despite herself. It's a huge deal, Emily said, and Sophie pulled back just enough to look at her, something searching in her expression. You're really not going anywhere, right? Sophie asked, quieter now, all the bravado gone. Just a 12-year-old girl who'd already lost one person she loved and was terrified in some deep, unspoken place of losing another. Like for real, not just for now. Emily crouched down slightly the way she had that very first day with Lily on the mall floor, meeting Sophie at eye level, refusing to let this moment pass without the weight it deserved. I'm not going anywhere, Emily said. I promise you that. I know promises are scary after everything you've been through, but I'm making this one anyway, and I intend to keep it. Sophie nodded quick, like she needed to move past the emotion of it before it overwhelmed her entirely, and then in a gesture that surprised everyone in the kitchen, including herself, she hugged Emily too quick and fierce, before pulling back and muttering something about the spaghetti burning, even though it wasn't. Lily, not wanting to be left out of whatever significant moment had just occurred, launched herself at Emily's legs with the full force of a 5-year-old's love, nearly knocking her over. Are we a family now? Lily asked entirely without guile, the question landing in the kitchen with the weight of something none of the adults had said out loud yet, though it had clearly been living in all of their chests for weeks. Daniel and Emily looked at each other over the girls' heads. I think we might be, Daniel said softly, watching Emily for her reaction, and when she smiled, really smiled unguarded. Certain he smiled back, like the answer had settled something in him that had been unsettled for 3 long years. Six weeks later, the video that had once threatened to define Emily's entire existence had become something else entirely, not forgotten, never fully forgotten but folded into a bigger story. One she got to help write instead of just survive. She'd started almost by accident, answering messages from strangers who'd found her through the interview, women writing to say her words had gotten them through a hard week. Parents writing to say they'd shown the segment to their kids as an example of what decency looked like. A teenage girl in Ohio who wrote simply, "Thank you for saying it's okay to stop apologizing." That made Emily cry at her kitchen table for a full 10 minutes before she could type back a reply. She hadn't planned on any of it becoming something bigger. But Grace Alvarez called again in the 5th week, gently floating the idea of a follow-up piece, not about the cruelty this time, but about everything that had grown out of it. The community that had formed almost by accident around 5 words a stranger said in a mall. Emily said yes to that one without needing to think it over for days first. The morning of the follow-up interview, Daniel found her on the porch before the sun had fully come up, wrapped in a blanket, the little silver heart resting against her collarbone, the way it had every single day since he'd handed it to her. "You okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her, careful the way he always was. "I'm better than okay," Emily said, and meant it fully without hesitation, without the automatic flinch that used to follow a statement like that. "I keep waiting for the moment this all falls apart, and it hasn't. I don't know what to do with that." "Maybe," Daniel said, taking her hand. "You just let it be good. No waiting for the other shoe, just good." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sky lighten slowly over the street, over the porch he'd built with his own hands, over the life that had somehow impossibly assembled itself out of the wreckage of one terrible, ordinary afternoon. "I used to think," she said quietly, "that the worst thing that ever happened to me was falling down in that mall. And now I think it might be the best thing that ever happened to me, which feels insane to say." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "It's not insane, it's just true. Sometimes the worst days crack us open enough to let something better in. Doesn't make the bad day good. Just means good can come out of it anyway." They sat there a while longer quiet together, the morning settling gently around them, neither of them yet knowing that the biggest test of everything they'd built was still waiting somewhere ahead, a night months from now, when Emily would nearly disappear entirely under the weight of an old shame that refused to stay buried, and Daniel would find her sitting alone in the dark and ask her the one question, not without hard days, but steady, real. She moved half her things into Daniel's house by October, not officially, nothing formal, just a toothbrush that became 2 toothbrushes, that became a drawer that became half a closet. The way these things happen when nobody's rushing and nobody's counting. Lily had taken to calling her "my Emily," in front of teachers, in front of strangers, in front of anyone who would listen. And the first time Emily overheard it actually standing outside Lily's classroom door during pickup. She'd had to press her hand to her chest and breathe through the sudden overwhelming ache of being claimed by a child who had every reason to be careful about who she let in. Sophie had started showing Emily her sketchbook without being asked at all now. She'd started too mentioning her mother, more small things, offhand things. The way she used to make chocolate chip pancakes shaped like animals, the sound of her laugh, the way she always sang the wrong words to songs on purpose, just to make Sophie's father groan. Emily understood without either of them saying it out loud that this was Sophie testing whether she could hold both things at once, missing one mother and loving another kind of presence in her life without it being a betrayal of anyone. "Does it bother you?" Sophie asked one evening apropos of nothing, while they sat together doing homework at the kitchen table. "When I talk about her?" "Never," Emily said immediately without hesitation. "Sophie, I would never want you to stop talking about your mom. She's part of you. I'd never ask you to set that down for my sake." Sophie studied her for a long moment. "Some of Dad's old girlfriends didn't like it. Before you. There weren't many, but the couple there were. They'd get weird whenever Mom came up. Emily hadn't known there'd been anyone before her. Not really. Not seriously. Daniel had mentioned it only in passing, a couple of dinners. Nothing that stuck a man too raw with grief to let anyone close. But hearing it from Sophie, hearing the quiet wound underneath the words, told Emily something important about what this girl had already learned to brace for. "I'm not going anywhere near that kind of weird," Emily said. "Your mom is part of the reason your dad is who he is. Part of the reason you're who you are. I don't want to compete with that. I just want room next to it." Something in Sophie's shoulders loosened some tension she'd apparently been carrying quietly for longer than Emily realized. "Okay," she said. "Good, because I like having you around, in case that wasn't obvious." "It was obvious," Emily said, smiling. "But I'm glad you said it anyway." Life for a while felt almost unbearably good, and Emily kept waiting for the catch, the way she always had the old habit of scanning the horizon for the storm that surely had to be coming, because good things in her experience always came with a bill attached, eventually. The bill came due on a Friday in late November, and it arrived in a form none of them had expected. Emily's mother called. They hadn't spoken in almost a year, not from any dramatic falling out, just the slow erosion of a relationship that had never been particularly warm, to begin with a mother who had spent Emily's entire childhood making comments about her weight disguised as concern. A mother who had once at Emily's own college graduation pulled her aside to suggest that maybe she should think about it before the ceremony photos because you'll want to look back and be happy with how you looked. Emily still remembered standing in her cap and gown, 22 years old, feeling her accomplishment shrink to nothing under the weight of that comment. They talked occasionally after that, holidays, birthdays, the obligatory check-ins, but never anything real, never anything that felt like a relationship built on actual closeness, rather than duty. So when her mother's name lit up on Emily's phone that Friday evening, Emily's stomach tightened before she'd even answered. "Mom, hi, Emily." Her mother's voice had the particular brightness it always got right before delivering something unpleasant. "I saw the interview. Both of them, actually. The local one and the big one." "Oh." Emily's chest went tight. "What did you think?" "I think," her mother said, and there was a pause that Emily recognized immediately, the pause before a blow. "That it's wonderful you're getting attention for standing up for yourself. Really, I do. But Emily, sweetheart, I have to ask, don't you think all this exposure is just going to invite more comments? More people looking at you, talking about your weight? I worry the interview did more harm than good, honestly. You've put yourself right back in the spotlight, and I just don't know if that's wise given everything." Emily sat down slowly on the edge of her bed, the familiar sickening feeling of shrinking settling over her chest like it had 1,000 times before. "Mom, the interview was about kindness, about standing up for people. It wasn't about my weight." I know. But people are going to focus on that regardless, aren't they? That's just how the world works. I just want to protect you from more of what happened at that mall. I don't want you hurt again." "You could protect me," Emily said, something rising in her chest that surprised her with its heat, "by not being one more voice telling me my body is a problem to be managed. That's what would actually help Mom." Silence on the line. "I didn't say that," her mother said, wounded. Now the tone shifting into the practiced hurt Emily remembered from 100 childhood arguments. "I'm just being honest with you because I love you. Nobody else is going to tell you these things." "Maybe that's the point," Emily said. Quiet, steady. Something inside her finally standing up after 31 years of sitting down. "Maybe nobody else needs to. Maybe I don't need someone in my corner telling me to shrink so the world hurts me less. I need someone telling the world to stop hurting me in the first place." "I don't know where this is coming from," her mother said. "You've changed." "Yeah," Emily said. "I have. And I think it's the best thing that's ever happened to me." She hung up before her mother could respond, hands shaking, chest heaving, and sat there on the edge of the bed for a long moment, feeling something she couldn't fully name. Grief. Maybe for a relationship that had never been what she needed it to be, mixed with something fiercer. Something that felt almost like pride. Daniel found her there a few minutes later, took one look at her face, and sat down beside her, without needing to ask what had happened. "My mom," Emily said simply. "Ah," Daniel said, and the single syllable carried enough understanding that Emily didn't need to explain further. He'd heard enough stories by now to know the shape of it. "I told her off," Emily said, half laughing, half crying. "I actually told my mother off. I don't think I've ever done that in my entire life." "How does it feel?" Emily considered the question seriously. "Terrifying," she admitted. "And also like something finally came loose that's been stuck for 30 years. Daniel pulled her against him, and they sat like that for a while, and Emily let herself feel the whole complicated weight of it, the loss of a relationship that had never really been what it should have been, and the strange, unexpected relief of finally saying so out loud. She thought that was going to be the hard part of that season. She thought that phone call was the storm she'd been bracing for. She was wrong. 3 weeks later, right before Christmas, the video found its way back into the news cycle one more time. Not through some new cruelty. This round, but through an anniversary piece, a Where Are They Now segment. Some outlet decided to run revisiting viral stories from the year. Somewhere in the researching for that segment, a producer had dug deep enough to find something Emily had never told anyone. Not Daniel, not Priya, not even her own mother. 15 years ago, at 16 years old, Emily had spent 3 weeks in a hospital program for an eating disorder that had nearly killed her, a secret she'd buried so deep for so long that she'd almost convinced herself it belonged to someone else entirely, some earlier, more fragile version of Emily she'd left behind on purpose. The producer had found an old local newspaper clipping from a fundraiser the treatment center had run. Emily's name buried in a list of program alumni who'd agreed to be photographed for a brochure 16 years old and hollow-eyed, in a photo she barely remembered being taken. They ran it. Not cruelly, not exactly. The segment framed it almost sympathetically, using it as evidence of Emily's long journey with body image, a phrase that made Emily's skin crawl the moment she read it, because it took the most private, most painful chapter of her entire life and turned it into a tidy narrative arc for a segment nobody had asked her permission to include. Emily found out about it the way she'd found out about the original video. A notification, a link, a stranger's cruelty packaged as human interest, except this time it wasn't strangers laughing at a fall. This time it was her own history, excavated and displayed without her consent. A wound she'd spent 15 years carefully keeping closed, now torn open in front of millions of people who had no right to see it. She didn't cry when she read it. That was the frightening part. She just went very, very still, the way she remembered going still in the hospital all those years ago. A kind of quiet that wasn't peace at all, but its opposite, a shutting down, a retreat so far inward that the outside world stopped fully reaching her. Daniel came home from a job site to find her sitting on the porch steps in the cold, no coat, staring at nothing. "Emily?" He crouched in front of her, immediately alarm sharpening his voice. "Emily, hey, you're freezing, what happened?" She handed him her phone without a word. He read it, and she watched his face change, watched the alarm shift into something rawer, something that looked almost like fury on her behalf. "They ran this without talking to you at all. They didn't need to." Emily said, her voice strange and flat, even to her own ears. "It's public record. Old newspaper archive. Legal apparently, even if it's—" She stopped. Started again. "I was 16, Daniel. I almost died. And now it's a footnote in a segment about my journey with body image, like it's some inspirational chapter instead of the worst thing that's ever happened to me." Daniel sat down beside her on the cold steps, wrapped his coat around her shoulders without asking, pulled her in against him. "I never told anyone," Emily said, and now the tears came finally hot and shaking. "Not my friends, not my coworkers. I barely even let myself think about it most days. It was mine. It was the one thing that was still just mine, and now it's not. Now everyone gets to have an opinion about that too. You didn't tell me either," Daniel said gently. No accusation in it at all, just an observation, soft and careful. "I was going to," Emily said. "I promise I was going to. I needed it to be my choice. When I told you. How I told you. And now that choice is gone. Some stranger just took it the same way they took everything else, and I don't—" Her breath caught ragged. "I don't know how many times I'm supposed to survive people deciding what parts of my life get to be public." They sat there a long time in the cold. Daniel holding her, saying nothing more, because there was nothing to say that would fix what had already happened. That night was the beginning of the darkest stretch Emily had faced since the whole ordeal began. She stopped sleeping properly. She started skipping meals, not dramatically, not in a way anyone would immediately notice, just small erosions. A missed breakfast here, a lunch she claimed she'd already eaten, a dinner she pushed around her plate more than she ate. Daniel noticed within 4 days. Of course he noticed. He'd made a habit of paying attention to her in a way almost nobody in her life ever had. "Emily," he said one evening, watching her push rice across her plate for the 3rd night in a row. "Talk to me, please." "I'm fine," Emily said, the old lie worn smooth from years of use. "Just not that hungry." "You said that yesterday, and the day before." "I'm allowed to not be hungry, Daniel." "You are," he agreed, careful not wanting to push too hard and break something fragile. "But I also know what it looked like 15 years ago based on what you told me, and I'm scared, Emily. I'm scared of what this is starting to look like now." Emily set her fork down, something in her chest cracking at being seen so clearly, at not being able to hide even the smallest slippage from a man who'd apparently learned every version of her, including the ones she'd hoped to keep buried forever. "I don't want to go back there," she whispered. "I don't want to be that girl again. But I don't know how to make the noise stop, Daniel. It's like everyone gets to have a say in my body except me. My mom. Strangers online. Now this thing I spent 15 years trying to heal from dragged out into the light without my permission. I don't know how to hold all of it anymore." "Then let me hold some of it," Daniel said. That's what this is. That's what I'm here for. You don't have to carry this by yourself." But even Daniel's steadiness, even his patient, unwavering presence, couldn't fully stop the slide. 2 weeks before Christmas, Emily missed a family dinner. She'd promised Sophie and Lily she'd be at claiming a headache, and when Daniel came to check on her afterward, he found her sitting in her old apartment. She'd kept it, still paid rent on it, even as most of her life had migrated to his house. A small, unspoken safety net. Neither of them had discussed directly, sitting on the floor of her closet, with the door mostly closed, knees pulled to her chest. "Hey," he said softly, sliding down to sit beside her on the floor. "Hey, I'm here. I keep thinking about disappearing," Emily said, her voice small younger. Somehow the words costing her everything to say. Not like before, not like that scary night in the fall. Just smaller than that. Just wanting to not be seen for a while. By anyone. Even you. Even the girls. "I feel like I'm taking up too much space in everyone's worry right now, and it would just be easier if I—" "Don't finish that sentence," Daniel said, quiet but firm. "Please, just don't." Emily looked at him, tears sliding down freely now. "I don't know how to stop feeling like a burden." "You're not a burden," Daniel said. "You are the reason my daughters remember how to laugh at dinner. You are the reason I stopped sitting alone in my truck every night instead of walking into my own house. You have given this family more than you will ever fully understand, and I am not going to let you disappear into some closet because the world decided your worst chapter belonged to them instead of you. I don't know how to make it stop hurting." "You don't have to make it stop tonight," Daniel said. "You just have to let me sit here with you while it hurts. That's all. That's the whole plan." He stayed. He didn't try to fix it, didn't try to talk her out of the pain, just sat on the floor of a closet with her for 2 hours until her breathing evened out, until the sharpest edge of the panic dulled enough that she could stand. Could eat a few bites of the sandwich he made her afterward. Could fall asleep finally with his arms around her instead of alone with her own spiraling thoughts. But something had shifted in Emily that Daniel couldn't fully see. Not yet, a quiet, creeping conviction that had started forming somewhere in the dark of that closet and hadn't fully left since. The conviction that she was, despite everything, still fundamentally a burden. That the noise around her life had become too loud, too costly for the people she loved to keep absorbing on her behalf. That maybe the kindest thing she could do for Daniel, for Sophie, for Lily, for the family that had assembled itself so improbably around her, was to quietly step back before she cost them any more. She didn't tell anyone this. She smiled through Christmas Eve at Daniel's sister's house, played along with Lily's elaborate present wrapping ceremony, hugged Sophie tight under the mistletoe Lily insisted on holding over everyone's heads, whether they wanted it or not. She let herself for one evening be entirely present in the warmth of a family that had chosen her, but underneath it, the quiet conviction kept growing small and persistent, whispering the same old lie in a new shape: you are too much. You cost too much. The people who love you would be safer, easier, lighter without you in their orbit. 3 days after Christmas, on a cold, clear night, Emily told Daniel she needed some space to think just for the evening, just a walk to clear her head. He offered to come with her. She said no gently, and something in his eyes told her he wasn't entirely convinced. But he let her go anyway, trusting her the way he'd trusted her with everything else since the day a jewelry rack fell over in a shopping mall. She walked for a long time. She didn't have a destination in mind, not consciously, but her feet carried her eventually to a small park 2 blocks from her old apartment. A park she used to walk through as a teenager when the noise in her own head got too loud to sit still within doors. She sat down on a bench beneath a bare tree, the cold seeping up through the wood, and she let herself finally fully feel the weight of everything she'd been carrying since that segment aired. The old wound. Reopened her mother's voice in her head. The exhausting, endless calculation of how much space she was allowed to take up in a world that seemed determined to keep reminding her the answer was less. She didn't notice Daniel had followed her at a distance, worried enough to break his promise not to, until he was standing in front of the bench, hands in his coat pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. Emily looked up startled, and something in his face. The fear barely restrained the love underneath it, raw and unguarded, in a way she'd never seen from him before, made the wall she'd been building all evening crack straight down the middle. He didn't sit down right away. He just stood there for a moment, looking at her like he was trying to memorize the sight of her sitting whole and breathing in front of him, like some part of him had been afraid he wouldn't find that. Then he sat down beside her on the cold bench, close his shoulder against hers. "I know you said you needed space," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I followed you. I couldn't sit at home not knowing if you were okay. Not after the closet. Not after everything the last few weeks." Emily didn't answer right away. She stared at her hands in her lap, the cold biting at her fingers, and something in her chest felt too heavy and too loud to speak around. "I've been thinking," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that maybe you'd all be better off if I stepped back, just a little, just enough that I'm not the reason your family has to keep absorbing all this noise. The reporters, my mom, that segment about the hospital. I keep bringing more and more into your kids' lives, and none of it is fair to them." "Emily." Daniel's voice cracked just slightly, and he turned to face her fully on the bench. "Is that what tonight is? Are you trying to leave?" "I don't know what tonight is," Emily admitted, tears finally spilling over cold against her cheeks in the winter air. "I just know I'm so tired of being the reason everyone around me has to be brave. I'm tired of costing people so much just by existing." Daniel didn't say anything for a long moment. He didn't try to argue with her, didn't launch into reassurances the way she half expected, half braced for. He just sat with her in the cold, letting the silence stretch, and when he finally spoke, his voice was steady in a way that cut through everything else in Emily's spinning head. "Can you promise me one thing?" he said. Emily looked up at him, something in his tone catching her attention even through the fog of her own exhaustion. "What?" she asked. "Will you stop believing strangers know your worth better than you do?" The question landed somewhere deep in Emily's chest, somewhere that had been waiting, she realized, for exactly those words for 31 years. Not "you're beautiful." Not "everything will be okay." Just that a plain, direct challenge to the one belief that had shaped every apology, every shrinking, every quiet retreat of her entire life. "I don't know how," Emily whispered, the tears coming harder now, her whole body shaking with the force of finally saying the truest, most frightening thing she'd carried in years. "I don't know how to just decide I'm worth something when the whole world keeps telling me otherwise." "You don't decide it because the world agrees," Daniel said gently, taking her cold hands in his. "You decide it because it's true regardless of what the world says. My daughters know your worth, Emily. They've known it since the day you crouched down on that mall floor to talk to Lily instead of walking away in your own pain. I've known it every single day since. Your mother doesn't get a vote. Strangers on the internet don't get a vote. Whoever ran that segment without asking you doesn't get a vote. You are the only person whose opinion on this actually counts. And I am asking you right now to please start believing what the people who actually know you have been telling you all along." Emily broke then fully, the sob tearing out of her chest in a way that felt less like falling apart, and more like something finally releasing after being held too tight for too long. Daniel pulled her into him, held her on that cold park bench while she cried, not trying to stop it, not trying to fix it faster than it needed to be. Felt just staying steady, present the way he'd been steady and present since the very first day. "I don't want to disappear," Emily said finally, once the worst of the sobbing had passed, her voice hoarse and raw. "I don't actually want to leave. I think I just got so scared of being too much that I started trying to talk myself into being less before anyone could ask me to." "Nobody's asking you to be less," Daniel said. "I am asking you to be exactly as much as you are. All of it. The parts that are easy to love and the parts that are heavy to carry. I want all of it, Emily. I have wanted all of it since the day I watched you gather broken jewelry off a mall floor and apologize to people who owed you an apology instead." Emily let out a wet, unsteady laugh, the tension in her chest finally beginning to loosen. "You have a way of making a park bench in December sound romantic." "I have a way of meaning every word I say to you," Daniel said. "That's the only trick involved." They sat there a long while longer, the cold settling around them, neither of them in any hurry to move, and something had shifted permanently in the space between them. Not just comfort now, but a kind of vow, Neither of them had said out loud yet, though both of them felt its shape settling into place. When they finally stood to walk home, Daniel didn't let go of her hand once, not for the entire walk, not even when they stopped at a corner to wait for a light, not even when Emily's steps slowed briefly and she looked back toward the park, like she was leaving something important behind there in the cold. She was. She was leaving behind the version of herself that believed she had to earn the right to take up space. She didn't know it yet, not fully, not in words she could have said out loud that night. But somewhere between that bench and Daniel's front door, something had finally permanently changed. The next morning, Emily woke up in Daniel's bed to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Lily's off-key singing drifting up from the kitchen. And for the first time in weeks, she got up without the heavy weight in her chest that had been greeting her every morning since that segment aired. She found Sophie in the kitchen too, helping Daniel flip pancakes with the serious concentration of someone who took breakfast duty very seriously. And when Sophie spotted her in the doorway, she smiled a real smile, easy, unguarded. "Dad said you guys talked last night," Sophie said carefully, watching Emily's face for any sign of what that conversation had actually meant. "We did," Emily said. "Are you okay?" Emily thought about the question honestly before answering the way she'd learned to do over the past several months, instead of reaching automatically for the easy reassurance. "I'm getting there," she said. "I think that's the most honest answer I've got today. But I'm here, and I'm planning on staying here if that's still what everyone wants." "Obviously that's what we want," Sophie said, rolling her eyes with the particular affection of a 12-year-old, pretending the question was ridiculous, even as something relieved passed briefly across her face. Lily, catching only the last part of the conversation, abandoned her singing entirely to wrap herself around Emily's legs. "You're staying forever, right? Like actually forever, not just regular forever." Emily crouched down to Lily's height the way she had that very first day on the mall floor, and found herself smiling in a way that reached all the way down into the parts of her chest that had been aching for weeks. "Actually forever," Emily promised. Daniel, watching from the stove, caught her eye over Lily's head, and something passed between them in that look, quiet, certain, the kind of promise that didn't need grand gestures or park benches or dramatic speeches to be real. Just two people who had chosen each other fully in the middle of an ordinary kitchen on an ordinary morning, with pancakes burning slightly on the stove because nobody was paying enough attention to breakfast to notice. Nobody minded. They ate the slightly burnt pancakes anyway. All four of them crowded around the small kitchen table, and Emily thought, watching Lily narrate an elaborate and entirely fictional story about her stuffed rabbit's secret double life, while Sophie rolled her eyes and Daniel laughed at something only he found funny, that this exact unremarkable syrup-sticky morning was worth every hard thing it had taken to get here. She still had healing left to do. She knew that even in the warmth of that kitchen, even with the worst of the darkness behind her for now, there would be other hard days, other moments when the old voice crept back in. Other times, she'd have to remind herself consciously, deliberately, that her worth wasn't up for public vote. But she wasn't going to face any of it alone anymore. That much finally she believed completely. What none of them knew yet, sitting in that kitchen on that ordinary morning, was that the story wasn't finished. Unfolding that, in the months ahead, there would be one final test. Neither Emily nor Daniel could have fully prepared for a moment that would ask both of them to prove, in front of the very same crowd that had once laughed at Emily on a mall floor, exactly how far they'd both come. Spring came slow, and then all at once, the way it always does, and with it came a letter that arrived in Daniel's mailbox on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, addressed to both of them from the Meadowbrook Galleria's corporate office. Emily read it twice before she fully understood what it was asking. The mall wanted to host an event. A year almost exactly since the day Emily fell in that atrium, and somewhere in corporate marketing, someone had decided that the story of Emily and Daniel, now recognized, now genuinely beloved by more strangers than either of them could quite comprehend, deserved a kind of homecoming. They wanted to install a small plaque near the spot where it happened, some modest tribute to kindness, and they wanted Emily and Daniel there for the unveiling, along with anyone else who wanted to attend, open to the public, covered by local press. Absolutely not. was Emily's first response, the letter shaking slightly in her hand. We don't have to say yes, Daniel said carefully, watching her face. They want to turn the worst day of my life into a photo opportunity. Emily said, something old and sharp rising in her chest. The same mall that told me to leave so I wouldn't make a bigger scene now wants a plaque. Do you understand how insane that is? I understand completely, Daniel said. So we say no, simple as that. But Emily didn't feel simple about it, not really, and she found herself turning the letter over in her hands again and again over the following days. Some old wound and some new, unfamiliar feeling wrestling with each other every time she looked at it. It was Lily, of all people, who tipped the scale the way Sophie had tipped it months earlier with the interview. They were in the car, the four of them headed to Sophie's art show at school, when Lily piped up from the back seat with the kind of unfiltered clarity only a 6-year-old can manage. Are we going to go to the mall thing? We don't know yet, Bug, Daniel said. I think you should go. Lily said matter-of-fact, like she was weighing in on dinner options rather than one of the hardest decisions Emily had faced in months. Because if you don't go, all people will remember is you falling down. But if you go, they'll remember you were brave enough to go back. The car went quiet for a moment. Emily turned around in her seat to look at Lily, who was entirely absorbed in braiding the fringe on her backpack strap, seemingly unaware she'd just said something that landed like a small, precise thunderclap. When did you get so wise? Emily said, voice thick. I don't know, Lily said, shrugging. I just know stuff sometimes. Emily said yes 3 days later. The morning of the event, Emily stood in front of her closet. Her actual closet now, in Daniel's house. The one that no longer felt like a hiding place trying to decide what a person wore to face the sight of their public humiliation, turned unexpected redemption. She chose the navy cardigan again. It felt by now less like a symbolic choice, and more like an old friend, something she genuinely reached for, because she loved how it fit her, not because it was making some statement to anyone watching. Daniel found her in the mirror, adjusting the little silver heart at her collarbone out of habit more than necessity. You ready? He asked, coming up behind her, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. No, Emily said honestly. But I'm going anyway. That's basically the whole theme of your life this past year, Daniel said, and Emily laughed, surprised by how easily it came, even on a morning that had her stomach in knots. Sophie appeared in the doorway dressed nicer than her usual weekend clothes, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. You brought your sketchbook? Emily asked. I want to draw it, Sophie said, a little shy about it, still even after months of sharing her work more freely. The mall, today. I think it's going to be important to remember. Something in Emily's chest ached at the quiet, careful way this girl had made a habit of turning pain into something worth preserving. I'd love to see it when you're done, Emily said. Lily bounded in behind Sophie, already dressed, already impatient, already narrating something about how she hoped there would be pretzels at the mall because it's basically a rule that malls have pretzels. They drove over together, the four of them, and Emily spent most of the ride with her hand tightly laced in Daniel's. Watching the familiar roads pass by, feeling the old anxiety climb steadily in her chest the closer they got. The parking lot was fuller than Emily expected for a Saturday morning. She noticed the small crowd gathering near the entrance before Daniel even found a parking spot. Noticed the local news van parked near the doors. Noticed with a fresh wave of nausea just how public this was actually going to be. We can still turn around? Daniel said quietly, reading her face. No, Emily said, steadying her breath. I said I'd do this. I'm doing this. They walked in together. Daniel's hand firm around hers, Sophie and Lily flanking them on either side. And the moment they stepped through those doors, the atrium looked almost exactly the same as it had that day. The same tile, the same soaring skylight, the same accessories shop near the entrance. Though the jewelry rack had long since been replaced with something sturdier bolted down, now Emily noticed with a flicker of dark humor she hadn't expected to feel. A small crowd had gathered near a spot on the wall where a modest bronze plaque sat draped in a simple cloth waiting to be unveiled. Emily recognized the store manager standing nearby, an older man, now someone new, apparently since the incident, though she couldn't be entirely sure, and beside him stood a woman from corporate with a clipboard and the particular anxious energy of someone hoping today went smoothly. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Brooks, thank you so much for coming," the woman said, extending a hand. "We're honored to have you here." Emily shook her hand, feeling strange, suspended somewhere between the girl who'd knelt on this exact floor in humiliation and the woman standing here now being thanked for her presence, rather than asked to leave it. The ceremony itself was mercifully brief. A few words from the corporate representative about community and kindness that Emily only half listened to. The language a little too polished, a little too rehearsed for the raw thing it was trying to describe. Then, the cloth came away from the plaque, and Emily read the words engraved there, simple, unadorned. "On this spot, a stranger reminded us all that kindness costs nothing and means everything. She deserves better than this. May we all choose to be that stranger." Emily's eyes burned. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. A local reporter stepped forward for a few questions, and Emily braced herself. Old instinct kicking in immediately, waiting for a question designed to needle at old wounds. But the questions were gentle, genuine, what this last year had been like, what she wanted people to take away from the story, what advice she had for anyone facing public cruelty of their own. "I think," Emily said when the last question came, "that a year ago I thought the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened. I was wrong. The worst thing that could have happened would have been believing what that crowd said about me that day. The actual worst day of my life turned into the beginning of the best year of my life, and the only difference was one person deciding to say something instead of staying quiet." She looked at Daniel then, and something passed between them, warm and certain. The kind of look that needed no audience to be true, though this time an audience was watching every second of it. "So, if you're out there," Emily continued, turning back to the small crowd gathered around them, "and you see someone getting laughed at, someone getting filmed instead of helped someone on the ground needing a hand be the stranger. It costs you nothing. It might save someone everything." A ripple of applause moved through the small crowd, and Emily felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Not closure exactly, because some wounds don't fully close, but something like peace. Something like having finally completely reclaimed a space that had once been used against her. As the crowd began to disperse, a woman approached hesitantly, holding the hand of a young girl who couldn't have been older than 9. "Ms. Carter?" the woman said, a little nervous. "I'm so sorry to bother you. My daughter, she's been struggling. Kids at school. She saw your story on the news a few months back, and she's watched it probably 20 times since. I just wanted her to be able to meet you if that's all right." Emily crouched down immediately, the way she had with Lily on this exact floor a year ago, meeting the little girl at eye level. "Hi," Emily said gently. "What's your name?" "Maddie," the girl said, shy, barely audible. "Maddie, I'm really glad you're here today," Emily said. "Can I tell you something?" Maddie nodded. "Whatever those kids are saying to you at school, it's not true. Not one word of it. I know that because people said things to me for years, and I believed them for way too long, and I wish somebody had told me sooner that they were wrong the entire time. You are exactly enough, exactly as you are right now." Maddie's eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around Emily's neck in a sudden, fierce hug that nearly knocked Emily off balance. Emily hugged her back, feeling something in her chest crack open in the best possible way, understanding fully in that moment what it meant to be the thing you'd once needed and never gotten. The mother mouthed thank you over her daughter's shoulder, eyes wet, and Emily nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in her throat. Lily, watching this whole exchange with rapt attention, tugged on Emily's sleeve once Maddie and her mother had walked away. "You're like famous now," Lily said, matter of fact. "Like actual famous." "I don't know about famous," Emily said, laughing, despite the tears still standing in her eyes. "You are," Sophie said quietly, closing her sketchbook, having apparently finished whatever she'd been drawing during the ceremony. "But the good kind, the kind that actually means something," She turned the sketchbook around to show Emily the page, a quick, careful drawing of the plaque on the wall, and beside it, unmistakably a small sketch of the four of them standing together, hand in hand, Lily mid-jump in the corner, because apparently Sophie had captured her exactly as she was unable to stand still even for a memory. "Sophie, this is beautiful," Emily said, voice thick. "I'm gonna call it family," Sophie said, a little shy, watching Emily's reaction carefully. "If that's okay, if that's what we are." "That's exactly what we are," Daniel said, before Emily could even find the words, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't bothering to hide anymore. They stood there together for a long moment, the plaque gleaming softly on the wall behind them, the mall moving on around them, the way malls do, indifferent to the significance of any particular spot on any particular floor. And Emily thought about how strange it was that a place built to sell things had somehow become the place where she'd learned the most important lesson of her entire life. That worth was never something you had to earn from a crowd, that it had been hers all along, waiting patiently for her to finally claim it. That evening back at the house after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch mid-sentence about pretzels she never did get to eat, and Sophie had retreated to her room with new pages already forming in her sketchbook. Emily sat on the porch with Daniel, the same porch where he'd first kissed her, the same porch where so much of their story had quietly unfolded over the past year. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, and something in his voice made Emily turn to look at him fully. "Always," she said, echoing the words she'd said to Sophie so many months ago in that kitchen, back when all of this had still felt fragile and new. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket, and Emily's breath caught before he'd even fully pulled his hand back out, some instinct in her chest, already understanding what was happening before her mind fully caught up. "I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, Daniel admitted, a small nervous laugh escaping him. "Trying to find the right moment, and I kept overthinking it, kept waiting for something bigger, some perfect setting. And then today happened, and I watched you stand in that mall and turn the worst day of your life into something that healed a 9-year-old girl I'll never even know the name of, and I thought there is no moment bigger than the ones we already have. There's no version of you I love more than the one sitting right here on this ordinary porch on an ordinary Saturday." He opened the small box, and the ring inside caught what little porch light there was. Simple, unfussy. Exactly the kind of thing Emily would have chosen for herself, if she'd ever let herself imagine choosing something like this at all. "Emily Carter," Danielle said, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly moving through him. "A year ago I stood in a mall and told a room full of strangers, you deserved better than what they were giving you. I meant it then, and I mean it more now than I've ever meant anything in my life. I want to spend the rest of my life being the person who makes sure you never have to wonder about that again. Will you marry me?" Emily didn't answer right away, not because she was uncertain, but because the moment felt too large to rush through, too important to meet with anything less than her full, undivided presence. She looked at this man who had knelt beside her on a mall floor without hesitation, who had shown up at her door at 8 in the morning after a night he thought might be her last, who had followed her to a cold park bench in December and asked her the single question that had finally cracked open 31 years of believing she wasn't enough, and she felt completely without a shadow of doubt, anywhere in her chest, exactly what her answer was. "Yes," Emily said, and the word came out clear and certain, no hesitation in it at all. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Daniel slid the ring onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady, and when he kissed her, it tasted like relief and joy, and every hard month that had led them both to this exact porch, this exact night. A sound at the doorway made them both look up. Sophie, standing there in her pajamas sketchbook, still clutched to her chest, having apparently come down for water, and stumbled onto something far more significant. "Did he just—" Sophie started, eyes wide. "He did," Emily said, laughing through fresh tears, holding up her hand. Sophie let out a sound somewhere between a shriek and a sob, and launched herself across the porch, nearly knocking Emily backward in the force of her hug, and the commotion woke Lily inside, who came stumbling out. Moments later, hair wild with sleep, immediately sensing something enormous had happened, even before anyone explained it. "Are you going to be my actual mom now?" Lily asked once the situation had been explained to her in the careful, simplified terms a 6-year-old required. And the question landed in the quiet porch air with a weight none of them had quite braced for. Emily crouched down to Lily's level, the way she always did, the way that had become as natural to her as breathing. "I would be so honored to be that for you," Emily said carefully. "If that's something you want." Lily nodded fiercely, throwing her arms around Emily's neck. "I already tell people you're my Emily. This just means I get to tell them you're my mom, Emily, now too." Daniel, watching his daughters wrapped around the woman he'd just proposed to on the same porch, where he'd first let himself believe he might get to love again, felt something settle fully into place in his chest. Not relief exactly, because there had never been real doubt, but something like arrival, like finally reaching the place he'd been walking toward since a jewelry rack fell over in a crowded mall and changed the entire direction of his life. They married the following spring. A small ceremony in Daniel's backyard, the same yard where Lily had once picked flower pot colors for the porch, the same yard that had slowly quietly become the center of Emily's entire world. Sophie stood beside Emily as her maid of honor 14, now taller, steadier the sketchbook that had once been a private guarded thing, now practically famous among their small circle of friends, for the careful loving way it had documented an entire year of a family finding its footing. Lily 7 scattered flower petals down the aisle, with the theatrical seriousness of someone who considered this the single most important job ever assigned to a human being, occasionally stopping to make sure everyone was properly appreciating her technique. Priya was there crying before the ceremony even started. Grace Alvarez came too, having become something like a friend over the past year, rather than just the woman who'd given Emily her voice back. Even Dr. Chen showed up beaming, having become one of Emily's most steadfast supporters through every hard week of the past year. Emily's mother did not attend. That relationship remained still a work in progress. Something Emily had learned to hold with grief, rather than bitterness. Understanding now that some people simply weren't capable of the growth she needed from them, and that this didn't have to be a wound that defined her. Only one that she carried quietly alongside everything good that had grown around it. When Emily walked down the makeshift aisle between the rows of folding chairs, past faces she loved, toward Daniel standing at the end of it in a suit that fit him slightly awkwardly, because he'd bought it 3 sizes ago and refused to get it altered out of some strange, sentimental attachment. To the moment he'd bought it, she felt none of the old instinct to shrink to apologize for the space she was taking up to brace for the judgment of a watching crowd. She simply walked steady and certain toward the life she had chosen, and the life that had chosen her back. "You look incredible," Daniel whispered when she reached him. His eyes bright with tears, he wasn't bothering to blink away. "So do you?" Emily whispered back, smiling at the too small suit jacket, straining slightly across his shoulders. The officiant, a friend of Daniel's from his contracting days who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose, cleared his throat and began the ceremony. But Emily barely heard the opening words, too absorbed in simply looking at the man in front of her, at the 2 girls sitting in the front row, watching with matching expressions of fierce, open love at the small crowd of people who had shown up not because they had to, but because they wanted to witness this exact moment. When it came time for vows, Daniel spoke first, his voice steady, despite the emotion clearly moving through him. "A year and a half ago, I watched a woman apologize to a room full of strangers for an accident that wasn't her fault, and something in me refused to let that stand. I didn't know standing in that mall that I was about to meet the person who would teach my daughters what real strength looks like. Not loud, not performative, just quiet and steady and unbreakable even when the whole world seemed determined to break it. Emily, you have made our house a home again. You have made my daughters brave enough to be exactly who they are. And you have taught me that love isn't about fixing someone or saving them. It's about standing beside them while they save themselves, and being grateful every single day that they let you stay close enough to watch it happen." Emily's vows came harder, her voice catching more than once, but she pushed through them anyway, refusing to let the emotion stop her from saying everything she needed. This man, these girls, this entire watching crowd to hear. For most of my life, Emily said, I believed my worth was something other people got to decide. My mother. Strangers online. A crowd in a mall who laughed at me on the worst day of my life. I spent 31 years apologizing for taking up space in a world that seemed determined to tell me I didn't deserve any. And then a stranger knelt down next to me on a floor covered in broken glass and told a room full of people I deserved better. It took me a long time to believe him. It took an entire year of him showing up over and over in every hard moment, in every dark night, in every quiet Tuesday, that didn't ask for anything special except his presence for me to finally understand that he meant it. Daniel, you didn't save me. You never tried to. You just stood beside me long enough for me to save myself, and you did it without ever once making me feel like a burden for needing the time it took. Sophie Lily, you two taught me what it means to be chosen fully exactly as I am, no conditions attached. I love the three of you more than I ever believed I was allowed to love anything. When the officiant finally pronounced them married, the small backyard erupted into applause. Lily shrieking with unrestrained joy. Sophie crying openly, now no longer trying to hide it behind careful composure. And Daniel kissed his wife under a sky that had turned soft and golden with the last light of the afternoon in the exact backyard where a lonely grieving family had slowly patiently rebuilt itself into something whole. Later that evening, as the small reception wound down, Emily found herself alone for a moment on the porch, looking out at the yard full of people she loved. The fairy lights Daniel had strung through the trees, glowing softly against the darkening sky. She touched the little silver heart still resting at her collarbone, worn every single day, for a year and a half, now the $12 necklace that had somehow become the most valuable thing she owned. Daniel found her there, slipping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder the way he had so many times before. Regrets? He asked, teasing, though something genuine sat underneath the question too. Only one, Emily said, leaning back into him. What's that? That it took me 31 years to believe I deserved this, Emily said, turning in his arms to face him fully. But I'm not going to waste another single day making up for lost time. I know my worth now. I know it completely. And nobody, not a crowd, not the internet, not my own mother, not even my own worst thoughts, gets to take that away from me ever again. Daniel smiled the same steady, certain smile that had first pulled her off that mall floor a year and a half ago, and kissed her again gently beneath a sky full of stars. Neither of them needed to look up to fully feel. Somewhere inside the house, Lily was already asleep in her party dress, worn out from an entire day of flower petals and cake, in fierce, unrestrained joy. Sophie sat nearby on the porch steps, sketchbook open one more time, capturing the last of the evening light before it disappeared entirely, already knowing the way artists sometimes do, that this particular moment deserved to be remembered exactly as it was. And Emily Carter once, a woman who knelt on a mall floor, apologizing for an accident that wasn't her fault, who had spent a lifetime believing the loudest voices in the room got to decide her worth, stood in the arms of the man who had refused to let that story stand, surrounded by the family that had chosen her completely, and understood finally and forever that the greatest act of love had never been about being saved. It had been about finally fully believing she was worth saving in the first place. And that belief, hard-won and unshakable, would carry her through every single day still to come.